Hi, this is Todd Geis with Geis Interactive, and welcome to another video in our series on FileMaker transactions. And today we're going to be looking at how transactions can help if you're building some kind of a sync framework, or if you want to build, or if you want to use a sync framework like our Go sync framework, what kind of benefits you can expect from using FileMaker transactions to make sure that your syncs go well. So first thing to say is sync is hard. There's lots of things that can go wrong. You're dealing with sometimes cellular networks or shaky Wi-Fi networks where the connections can break while the sync process is happening. The phone could ring if you're using a FileMaker app running on an iPhone. There's a lot of things that can interrupt a sync, and your whatever system you're using to do sync should be able to handle those problems. Now, when talking about sync, there are two problems dealing with data transfer that I want to drill into today. The first one is that both sides should agree on the outcome of a sync. So when a sync occurs, server side and client side, FileMaker Go, FileMaker Server, should both understand what happened. And they should understand it in the same way. Multi-record entities should stay together is the other issue. And so that's really talking about entities that have more than one record in them, and we'll look at some examples on that in just a minute. So getting back to this both sides should agree issue. So what we're talking about here is when, let's say for example, FileMaker Go application wants to send 10 records up to the server. When it sends those 10 records and the server receives them, both the server and the client, the FileMaker Go app, should know that 10 records got sent. If they did get sent, the FileMaker server should know that it received 10, and the FileMaker Go app should know that it successfully sent 10. If only 9 of the 10 were successfully sent, both sides of that equation should know that there were only 9. If you don't do that, you run into some situations where you might, let's say the client side thinks all 10 went, but server only got 9. Well, now the client may try to sync again later, and that could be a problem. So it's important that when a sync is complete, both sides agree on the outcome, that they know what records were successfully synced and what records weren't. And if they agree, then you have this sort of known certain state on each end of that equation. The other thing is records that belong together should stay together. We call this multi-record entities. That's kind of maybe a geeky term, but what we're talking about are things like work orders and work order items. A work order is made up typically of a single work order record and then one or more related work order items records. And those things belong together. A work order item record doesn't have any meaning if it doesn't have its correct work order master record along with it, and vice versa. A work order isn't complete without its work order items. And you want to make sure that all of the records are transferred in one direction or the other, and not just some of them. That's really important, that when you send a work order from, say, the FileMaker Go app to a FileMaker server, that you can be certain that the work order went along with all of its related line items, or at least the changes that were supposed to go went together. You shouldn't be able to have a scenario where the work order item changes made it, but the work order didn't, or vice versa. So transactions can solve these problems. I mean, that's really what they're all about. As I said, we've talked about transactions before in these videos, and you can watch the videos that we've already got up, look at the articles we have on it, and you'll see what we're talking about there. So what we're going to look at today is GoSync, and GoSync is our scriptable FileMaker sync framework. John Sindelar and I at Seed Code developed this, and it is the only available it's the only available transactional sync framework on the market today. It's pure FileMaker. There are no plugins and no servers, so it's open and scriptable. So as a FileMaker developer, you can get in and tweak the sync and make it do exactly what you want. So we're going to show demos using GoSync, and there'll be some demo files available that you can download, and you'll be able to get a free 14-day demo license of this solution that we're going to be looking at. But really, what we're going to show applies to any framework that you have that's fully transactional. And GoSync is just our example of how to do that. Okay, so let's take a look at the demo file here. Let me explain. These are demo files. They don't have, it's not a working solution or something that's complete, but you're welcome to take them and build off them and do what you like. They're really focused. They focused on this process that we want to show here, this syncing of work orders. So other things like customer management items, all those things aren't in here because that's not important for the video that we wanted to show today. But we do have a lot of data in here. There are 20,000 work orders, only 13 of which are in an open state. The rest are closed. I like to do my testing with lots of data. It helps to keep things realistic. So how this works is a work order gets added to the system and it starts off in an open status. And then somebody in the office will schedule that for a given day, maybe for a given staff member. And then it'll be checked out to the iPads, worked on in the field, and when they're done, they check it back in, and then somebody in the office will invoice it, at which point it gets sent off and it's closed. So just to have another look at that flow, I want to make a couple points about that. So here it is going left to right, open, scheduled, then we go checked out, checked in, invoiced, and closed. So the syncing occurs here. The iPads look for all the work orders that they need that are scheduled for today and checks them out onto the iPad. And then when they're done, the iPad will send those back up and they're checked in. At which point somebody in the office will notice that they're checked in and will invoice those guys, and then they'll be closed. So we really want to make sure that this works correctly, because let's say this part works great, we get it checked out, the guy does a bunch of work on the invoice and he sends it up, but it doesn't quite go through. Some of the work order items don't make it, or they don't get updated. Well, you know, Sally in the office, whose job it is to invoice those, is going to have no way of knowing that that work order that's now checked in is really wrong, and is going to invoice that, get it sent off to the client. So that's an important part of what transactions bring to sync, is some certainty. That we can be certain that if a work order shows up in the system as checked in, then it was completely checked in, and it's safe to take further action on. We don't have to, worry about that. We don't have to wait for some other sync process to happen or to confirm it. We just know that it worked that way. All right. So getting back to the demo, excuse me, we have here's all our guys. We have 13 that are actually set up for today, and in the open status. Now, that's our server version. Let's look at the mobile version of the file, and this is the one that would run on the iPad normally. I'm going to be demoing here on the desktop, but this works the same way on the iPad. And when you get the files, you can install it on the iPad if you'd like, or you can test them out as I'm doing here, just within your single FileMaker session. So you can tell the difference between the Works mobile file and the Works demo file. They look kind of the same because they're the same, the same app. One runs on the mobile side. You can tell the difference because of these big sync buttons here, this green sync button and this check for updates button. So that'll be a good clue. The other clue is that the mobile version doesn't have this middle column, and we'll look at what that looks like when we get some data down there in a second. So Sally in the office, whose job it is to schedule these guys, let's say she takes this one and schedules it, and let's take another one. Let's take this one, and we'll schedule that one as well. So now they're scheduled, and if we look at the scheduled status, we see those two guys there. And now Joe out in the field picks up his iPad and does a sync. And now we could have set this filter up to only bring down records that were tagged to Joe, but in the demo we're just doing it based on day and status. But you can certainly add to the filter that Joe only gets his work orders, and Billy gets his, and Mary gets hers. So now those same two guys are down on the iPad, and important thing to know is that if we look at here, they're no longer scheduled, they're now checked out. So we have an agreement. Work orders were checked out to the iPad received them, and the server-side app knows that they were checked out. So that worked as it should have. Now we can send some data back up. So let's just add new data here. And let's change this guy from 7 to 2. So we've changed one of the work orders here, and it's this policy hacker one here, this one right here. all the names in this database are sort of randomly generated names. So Policy Hacker is a weird company name, but that's why. So let's sync that. So Joe out in the field finishes, let's say he doesn't finish, let's say he just syncs it. So now he syncs that back up, and we get our change up here. 2 is here and new date is here. It's still checked out because Joe hasn't finished. So Joe still owns the record, he still checked out the record, but it's not done yet. So, but let's say he does. Let's say he finishes this one, and let's say he finishes this one. He finishes them both, and then he syncs. So we're going to sync, and what's going to happen is those 2 guys have been checked back in, so they disappear from Joe's iPad because he's done with them. He doesn't need them anymore, and they now show up in the checked in status. Looks like we had another one checked in from before, but there's our 2 guys that we just finished up. So again, the important thing to know is that Joe's iPad agrees that he's done and he's checked those guys in, and the server agrees that they received those 2 items. So all that worked. Now we used GoSync to do those transfers there. So it would work even if we would still be able to get agreements between those 2 sides, even if there were problems. So to illustrate that, let me show you a problem that can occur, and let me show you what happens if you're not using a transactional framework like GoSync to manage this process. All right, so I've reset the demo to the state where we have 2 checked out items from our main hosted application, and they are showing up here on the iPad here. We'll call this Joe's iPad. So I'm going to introduce an error, and I'm going to get very detailed, drill down on just one direction of syncing. So we're just going to be pushing the records back up to the server. We've been showing round tripping syncing earlier in the demo, early in this video, but this one we're going to focus just on pushing up. Going to narrow in and look specifically at what happens when we're sending data up, and a problem that can occur as part of that process. So the error we're going to introduce is record locking, and that's just a good error. It's easy to demonstrate. It does occur, and it is something you need to be aware of. But it is not the only problem. So don't think that if you think you've reduced the amount of record locking that you are getting rid of all the problems that can happen in your sync. You haven't. There are many problems, many things that can stop a script from being able to edit a record. And we've written a bunch on this recently. There's some new articles and a couple new videos on the website that go over some of these issues in depth, and we cover them in a lot more detail. I'm going to summarize the whole thing by saying that it's important to remember that there is no guarantee that your script will complete. There's no guarantee it'll even complete. Forget the fact that it may not be able to edit the records you think that it can edit or that you want to edit. So your sync solution has to be able to survive that. Otherwise, you're going to have problems. There's going to be times when a script will not run to completion, or records will be locked or otherwise unavailable for editing. So that's our error we're going to show is record lock. And the mechanism that we're going to use to do syncing that will not survive record lock is just a straight import. Import is certainly the easiest way to transfer data from one file to another, and probably the fastest, quite frankly, but it's the least safe. And the reason is that imports are not transactional. They're batch processes in FileMaker, and batch processes tend to they save as many records as they can in these batches, and then they go on to the next set and they just loop through that until they're done importing. The problem is that if your script dies in the middle of an import, some of those records will have been saved, some batches will have been saved, and some will not have. And there's no way to know which records didn't make it and which records did. To compound that issue, in the case of a work order where you have work order items and work orders that you want to make sure get handled together, so that if I transfer a work order, its line items need to be transferred as well. Doing that with import is really not viable, because you need 2 import steps. You need to import work orders and then import work order items. So you've introduced another area, another part into your script where a failure could occur. Import work orders could work, but import work orders may not. And so now you have another problem. So work orders is the bad way to do syncing. Unless you do a tremendous amount of validation, you're almost certainly going to have problems right off the bat. But it's great for showing problems, so we're going to use it for that. So in this case, we're going to lock the second record on this work order. And I've done that just by bringing up another little layout of all of the work order items that are on the work order that we're interested in. And I'm going to lock the second one just by setting it, just changing the value, and we're going to leave that window open. So you can imagine that Sally in the office or Jimmy's making some changes to that work order item, and then phone rings. So he's left it like that, and that's the way it is. But out in the field, while that's going on, Joe is making some changes too, and he's made some changes to these guys here. He's changing them to 10, and maybe this one actually, let's change it to 1. So he's gone 10, 1, 10, and let's say he's fixed this value. So now he's made some changes, and he wants to sync, but he's going to use our import, which I built into the separate file here, to import the records up to the server. So we're going to press that button, and we'll see what happens. It tells us right away there was an error, so that's good. It says that some of the records were, says that it's error 729, which basically means some records were not imported. And that's the best you can do. So let's look at the impact of that and see what the problem is there. We now have a scenario between our two work orders. We have 10, 2, 10 here, and we have 10, 1, 10 here. So, and fix this did make it, so fix this made it, but one of the changes from the server, from the iPad, went up and one did not. And that's the problem, is that now we have records out of sync. Okay, so I reset the demo again to get us back to our standard place. This is our server file. There's our work order that we're working on, and this is our mobile file, and everything is back synced together. And I'm going to introduce that same problem again by just opening up the record and leaving it locked, and that's what I've done here. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll have Joe make a few changes out in the field, more changes. And well, let's have him do the same thing. Let's bring these back to 1. And then he's going to sync those, and we're going to use our GoSync transactional sync method to do that. And let's see what happens when we do that. So it's connecting to the server, and it's trying to push that record up. You can see it blinking a few times there. And what it was doing is it recognized that it was a 301 error. And I'll pull up the log in a second so we can look at that. But it recognized that it was a 301 error, and it tried 3 times to see if the person might be out of that field now, and so it reattempts. So GoSync is smart enough to know the difference between errors which might be transient, where it can try again a few times, and errors which are permanent and it's not going to be able, won't resolve. And so it tries to correct for that. But let's take a look at what happened. So Joe's stuff is still here. Nothing's lost, but nothing has changed here. So we didn't overwrite anything. We didn't get a scenario where anything was pushed up that shouldn't have. The reality, what happened was that Joe's item wasn't pushed up at all, and that's why it gave us that error and said there's something in the log you want to look at. And so what happened in this case is, since GoSync is transactional, it attempted to make the push, but it couldn't. So it just rolled back and didn't do anything. And so now this record is still ready to be pushed, and you can tell because it says modify down here. It can still be pushed the next time, but and it hasn't lost anything. So everything is set up the way that it should be. And now if we just get out of that record, so it's no longer blocking us. Whoops. Oh, we don't need that anymore. So it's no longer locking. I can push that again, and this time our changes will go through, and they went through. And if we look again, now we have agreement. So in the first case, GoSync said, I can't make this change. You're locked. So it doesn't make the change to the server, and it allows the person on the mobile to resend later and keep all their changes and send them back up to the server. So we did not get a scenario in that case where the data didn't agree. The iPad knew that it didn't sync. That's the key thing, is that the iPad, the mobile device, knew that it wasn't able to sync that record so that it could try again later. And the server side didn't get any broken records. So as far as it was concerned, nothing had happened yet. And so that's really how transactions help with your sync in this scenario, is that they either make sure that the change goes through, or they make it basically look like the change was never attempted and it can be tried again later. So that's it. That concludes the look at the demo for syncing with transactions. Okay, so coming back from the demo, let's just go over the couple of key points here. Transactions are really critical to ensuring that both sides understand what happened during a sync. You know that your multi-entity records, or I'm sorry, your multi-record entities made it up as a complete package, and you know that both the server and the client both understand in the same way what happened during that sync. That's really important for sync, and as we saw, GoSync is the only fully transactional sync framework available for FileMaker. Thanks very much. That's it.